Welcome to Sketchbook Legends. I'm your artist, Paul Hostetler. Today we're drawing Herman Melville's psychotic whaler, Captain Ahab. First name Captain, last name Ahab. Actually, first name Ahab. No known last name. Full disclosure, I have not read Moby Dick. I tried to read it. I got through a good portion of it. But then I got to the chapter where Herman Melville explains all the different kinds of whales from the viewpoint of an ignorant whaler, and he gets it all wrong. I don't know a lot about whales, but I do know that what he's calling a right whale and what he's calling a humpback whale and what he's calling a porpoise are not the same animals as what he describes in the book. At that point, I thought to myself, you're giving me bad information. The entire point of this book is to move information from Herman Melville to me. And I know that this information is bullshit, and if you can't get the whales right, how am I going to trust you when it comes to all the different knots or that a whaler uses, or how they store the whale's oil or vivisect the beasts? Yeah, he lost me on the whales chapter. Otherwise, I thought it was pretty good. Well, normally I'm against revising classical works, but if someone snuck into the archives and maybe they just updated the whales chapter of Moby Dick to reflect current scientific understanding, more people would read the book. At least I'd probably be more inclined to give it another go. They say it's a masterpiece, but it's a masterpiece that was written by someone who didn't know jack about whales. All right. And speaking of not knowing jack about whales, me here deciding not to pursue a career in whaling. It's a defunct industry anyway. Instead, I'm doing sketches, and I've decided to render this sketch in ink wash. I don't think I'm actually going to use ink for this, but I do plan on doing some grayscale work with liquid graphite and liquid charcoal, which means that my approach to sketching out the basics, the skeleton of the character, is going to be a little bit different. Even the line work that I'm choosing is going to be a little bit different, because I'm going to have solid blocks of value that I can use to delineate shapes. So I don't need to put as much effort into, say, the outlines or creating shadows. I think I'm going to do a little bit of shadow, because nothing that I've got in my ink wash arsenal is going to be quite as dark as just a solid Bimoji black brush pen. But I'm pretty much playing it by ear. Giving Ahab some beady, crazy eyes there. And I suppose my depiction of Captain Ahab is based a lot on the 1956 Gregory Peck version, which apparently critics weren't too keen on. I think one described him as sort of a nautical Abraham Lincoln. And I haven't actually seen the movie. I've just seen YouTube clips. But he does come across as less nuts and insane and obsessed with chasing a whale, and more as just stern and having made it his, a life goal to kill a white whale. But while I'm working on these little details, some Ahab facts. Ahab fact 1. In the book, Ahab is never given a last name. First name Captain, last name Ahab. But Ahab is a first name, not a surname. We're just never given his last name. People call him Captain Ahab. He's referred to in the text as Captain Ahab. It makes me wonder if Melville had a last name planned out and decided to make it a challenge just never to use it. Ahab fact number 2. In the Bible, Ahab is the name of a sinful idolater who, well, I'm not sure what happens, but he meets a messy fate in the way that biblical Old Testament figures usually do, which makes you wonder, why would Ahab's mother, Mrs. Ahab, give her son such a bizarre name? It's like naming your kid Cain or Hitler. But they explain that away as him having a mother who was insane. Fact 3, Ahab is supposed to be a Quaker, hence all of the different versions of him where he has a neck beard. You don't usually think of Quakers as being insane, obsessive whalers, but the Quakers that I've encountered seem very taciturn and dedicated to their work, whatever that may be. One can imagine that they would make good whalers. Ahab is competent, but, by the fact that he almost deliberately leads his ship into ruin and kills all of his crew, is not a good whaler. Ahab fact number 4. Ahab has a wife and a son. Both their names are also unknown. They just don't matter, and it kind of makes me wonder if his pay for, taking on responsibility for a whaling ship goes to them after his death. These are the little thoughts that keep me from writing a novel. I don't know if I could keep myself from just sliding that in there. It's definitely not important. Melville didn't think it was important, and it's not. He didn't even think Ahab's last name was important, and I guess it's not. Everybody knows exactly who you mean when you say Ahab. He even out-famous whoever that guy was in the Bible. Ahab fact 5. Ahab has a white scar, or possibly a birthmark, running from his hairline down his face, down his neck, possibly down his whole body. This is a little bit of symbolism, I'm betting, on Melville's part. Just the white whale has marred him. It's part of him now, it's part of his body. He and the white whale, Moby Dick, if you didn't know the white whale's name, are inextricably linked. And the only way that they will ever, not be linked is in death, which Ahab, spoilers, in which Ahab encounters at the end of the book. Moby Dick drags him to a watery grave, where I imagine at the bottom of the sea, fish will be eating off the white scar, removing it from Ahab's body along with all of the rest of his flesh. Gore, yeah. I left off the scarring just because I forgot it existed, but honestly, most of the adaptations kind of downplay the scarring. Alright, I've started the wash here. I've got a Sumi brush that I'm using for the wash. These are really good for washes. You can get nice fat lines or very, very thin, delicate lines out of this style of brush. I got them at Plaza Art Materials. I think this is a size number 2. You can tell it's a Sumi brush from that little fabric loop at the top. And you can see over there, I'm using the graphite square, the gray graphite square, to make some tone. Drawing in Ahab's mariner's coat. Probably not a pea coat, just the way I've drawn it. It looks a little bit more like a trench coat, but I don't know. Whalers were allowed to wear pretty much whatever they wanted. And the Gregory Peck version of Ahab wore a big black coat that made him look even more like Abraham Lincoln. So that's what I'm going with. A big flat swath of black, which will stand out nicely against the big white whale in the background, whose eye you can see right there underneath Ahab's armpit. One note about Sumi painting, it's the Japanese form of painting on rice paper, where they use just one stroke for each element of the painting. If you can imagine Western style watercolors, there's a lot of blending and going over and making sure that colors are correct and dabbing to create shapes. Sumi is the exact opposite. It's everything that people worry about when they start a watercolor, because with watercolor every mark is permanent. You can't paint over it, and you definitely can't. So you have to take care with what sort of marks you make. But it also is the reason watercolors are considered kind of elegant, in that if you make the right marks with a Sumi ink brush, they're smooth and they're arced, and they have a quality to them that's completely unmatched, which I am not doing justice to here with this thing, because I am not using Sumi ink and I'm not painting on rice paper. You have to have a whole setup for that, because if you paint on just a plain table, it'll get wet and stick to the surface you're painting on, so you have to have like a felt roll underneath. I'm not set up for that. I don't have that. I don't even have the Sumi ink, which is made out of compressed volcanic ash that just sort of grate into an inkwell as needed. I have had a few classes in painting Sumi ink style. I greatly enjoyed it. But what I'm doing here is not a Sumi ink. Maybe for another sketch I'll try and do a little more elegant one and done stroke making with. It wouldn't really work for Ahab anyhow. He's a very Western character. Moby Dick is considered the great American novel, or at least one of the great American novels, or the great American novel of its time. Not while it was out and about. Wasn't a great seller. Critics savaged it. But after it was dead, people took a different look, and that's the American way. Here comes a great idea. Everybody hates it. 40 years later, and they're like, why, oh, this was the best thing ever. All right. Doing a little work on Ahab's coat. I'm saving his peg leg for later on because that's going to be white. They say it's made of... In the beginning of the book, Ahab's leg is made out of wood. At some point he breaks it and has to have a new one made out of whalebone, which is a neat bit of extra symbolism. Thank you, Herman Melville, for all the symbolism. I'm sure you didn't know it would make your book last as long as it has. According to Melville's work, Captain Ahab's leg is got a flat area on one side, so he can sort of rest the peg leg on his other leg and do some quick math on it with a pencil, erase it real fast. And the Pequod, Ahab's ship, I guess he got permission from the ship's owners to drill little holes all through the deck so that he could stick his peg leg in the hole and not be falling all over the place, because it is just like a table leg. There's no way to be really stable on that sort of device unless you've got a little help. I'm using some of the liquid charcoal here to add some extra dark shadows. Looks almost as dark as the ink. When it dries, it will not be. I know this from doing the Benoit Blanc piece, but it's still important to have a range of tones throughout the piece. A little bit of pure white, a little bit of pure black, and everything in between. It really helps sell the depth. Now I've got the, I'm working with the charcoal square at the bottom, giving Ahab a little wet patent leather for his one boot. You know, I did a lot of research for this, and no one can agree what leg Ahab's peg leg is supposed to be on. I mean, Melville himself never explicitly says, oh, Ahab lost his left leg, or Ahab's right peg clomped along the deck in a tumpity-tump fashion. That's my impression of how Melville writes. And the movies and all of the comics and illustrations, people who actually read the book, none of them are any help. Of the movies, you know, there was a version in 1936 with John Barrymore as Ahab. Peg leg is on the right leg. In 1956, Gregory Peck was Captain Ahab. Peg leg is on the left leg. And by the way, that the Gregory Peck version was working off of a script written by Ray Bradbury, science fiction writer. Really great. Patrick Stewart in 1998, TV movie. Peg leg is on the right leg. In 2010, William Hurt played Ahab. Peg leg on the right. As far as illustrators go, I.W. Tabor, if you Google Moby Dick illustrated, this is the version that comes up the most. I.W. Tabor drew Ahab with the peg leg on his right. Rockwell Kent drew him with the peg leg on his left. There were a bunch of Classics Illustrated comic books of Moby Dick. First one, illustrated by Norman Nodell, has the peg leg on the right. Will Eisner famous for the spirit and a whole bunch of other stuff, puts the peg leg on the left. Alex Nino did a version of Moby Dick in which the peg leg is on the left leg, and I think the most recent Classics Illustrated comic version with art by Bill Sienkiewicz has the peg leg also on the left. Right, left, nobody can agree. On some level, it doesn't matter in the same way that Ahab's last name doesn't matter, but it almost kind of does. I almost forgot the most important adaptation of Moby Dick ever committed to paper. Adventure Comics number 332, published in 1938, written by Edmund Hamilton, drawn by John Forte and George Klein. The Super Moby Dick of space, in which Ahab is portrayed by Lightning Lad, who loses his right arm to a massive space creature and becomes obsessed with hunting it down and killing it. Classic stuff. All right, I'm drawing Moby Dick's eyeball here. It should be noted this is wildly out of proportion to actual sperm whale eyeball sizes. A normal sperm whale is about 52 feet long, and Moby Dick was supposed to be 90 feet long. But in terms of the size of their eyes, the size of a normal sperm whale's eyes, at least today, is about 2.7 inches. And Moby Dick's, you scale that up for a 90-foot-long whale. Moby Dick's eye would be about 5 inches across. And they don't have brows. But I tried to make it look kind of whale-like. And if you ever see an illustration or a photo of a real whale, they've got these big old bags under their eyes and over their eyes that make them look kind of sleepy and gentle. And I tried to add those meaty bags to make it look like this guy's just full of blubber and hate. And I didn't want to do the eye, didn't want to have that eye outlined in pen, just so it would sort of recede into the background. Especially when there's no other distinguishing mark to, tell you that something's in the background. It's important to give the viewer all the cues that you can in order to make sure that things come across the way you want them to. Sometimes doing less is more. All right, Captain Ahab's harpoon there. There are a lot of different kind of whaler harpoons. I chose the one that was easiest for me to draw. In the book, Moby Dick, Ahab requests that the ship's blacksmith take a bunch of his used razors and smelt those into the shape of a harpoon so that he can stab Moby Dick with his own rusty razor blades. And you can see right there that I've also decided to use some of that white pigment. I'm not sure exactly what it is, maybe chalk, to add a little sea spray. So it looks like Captain Ahab is actually at sea. And what I'm doing here with the shaft of the harpoon is really important. I've got the harpoon itself going across a field of dark gray and black in Ahab's coat, and then a space of white in his pants, and then against the white whale Moby Dick. So in order to distinguish it, you gotta create contrast. We'll do a few highlights on Ahab's cravat there. I don't know if Quakers use cravats. Seems like something a 18th century ship's captain might have. And since Moby Dick himself is in the background, we need something in the middle ground. There should be some ship components behind him. The bulwark, which is what they call that part of the ship that sticks up from the deck, sort of like a railing. You'll notice there are not a lot of comic books involving sailing ships, and that's just because old-time sailing ships had a lot of ropes hanging everywhere. All of them are important. All of them are a pain to draw. So I left them out. And add a little reflection into Moby Dick's eye of the implement, which may or may not kill him at the end of the book. They leave it ambiguous. Herman Melville leaves it ambiguous as to whether Moby Dick dies at the end of Moby Dick. Add the signature. Date. And there you have Captain Ahab and Moby Dick from Herman Melville's Moby Dick. If you liked this video, click the like button. That would really help me out. If you really liked this video, you can click the subscribe button. That'll make sure you're aware of when other videos which you may like also, when those will drop. I've got a Patreon, I've got a Ko-Fi. Those two are if you've got loose change and you think I deserve some. I've got a Blue Sky if you want to find out what I'm doing at the moment. All three of those you can find under the handle phostetlerart. And that's all for me. Stay sketching, stay legendary. See you next time.